Hey everybody, this is my History of Dallas presentation. I've worked really hard on this. It's mostly a slideshow. It is designed for high school students, but it's got a lot for everybody. If you like the history of Dallas, it is not sentimental. That's just my style. I hope you really like this. I got this off pictures off of Facebook, public library, Flickr, all kinds of places. So let's begin. All right, so Dallas is on the three forks of the Trinity River. That's why it's called Trinity. It's the Spanish conquistadors named it because it branched out, and they called it La Santísima Trinidad, the Holiest Trinity. So there's a little geography. John Neely Bryan, you could say, is the founder of Dallas. He came here. He came here to set up a trading post for local Indians in 1841, and he put his cabin right along the bank of the Trinity River. And this is supposedly his cabin. I've heard that some of these timbers are legit. And you know what's strange is the location is actually kind of accurate because the Trinity River used to be very close to this location in downtown Dallas. But he loved Indians, Native Americans. He came here hoping to set up a trading post with them, and they were all gone when he got here. And so he spent the first nights, a few nights on the banks of the Trinity River, and eventually more people started to come. During the Civil War, Dallas was not a very big city. As a matter of fact, Lancaster was a bigger city than Dallas was. Dallas had only 8,700 people. The city itself had 775 people. So Dallas barely existed during the Civil War. Lancaster had a pistol factory. It was bigger than Dallas. So I don't have a lot of pictures from that time period. Dallas is a very young city. During Reconstruction, African Americans migrated to Deep Ellum after they were freed from slavery, and Deep Ellum will evolve over the next 100 years or so to become the quote unquote Harlem of Dallas. And this is the oldest picture of downtown that I've ever seen, 1872. Remember, if you ever want to hit pause, usually it's the space bar if you want to look at a picture, but I'm going to move pretty fast on this. Dallas was a huge market for buffalo hides such as these, and this is one of the first department stores in the world created by the Sanger brothers. Sanger brothers will go on to form Sanger Harris, which will eventually become Foley's, which will eventually become Macy's. And here's an old postcard from about 1890. Here's a picture that was about 1890 downtown. Dallas has always had a fantasy of getting on the Trinity River and getting on a boat and Dallas becoming a port city where you can just enter from the Gulf of Mexico in a big boat and go all the way to Dallas. That didn't happen. The only boat that has ever made it was this boat right here, the H.A. Harvey. But the Trinity River is not deep enough. It is not wide enough for any kind of serious boat traffic. This is what the Trinity River looks like. You could walk across it sometimes. It's not a very deep river. It's not like in Austin or in San Antonio. Those are real rivers. The Trinity is not much of a river. It does flood sometimes. The Native Americans told John Neely Bryan to watch out for the Trinity River because it does flood occasionally. This is a picture of a flood from 2007. This guy, he was a real estate developer named Thomas Layfayette Marsailis. He was the founder of Oak Cliff. And he constructed this building. And this building was a hotel. It became the Oak Cliff College for Young Ladies. And then it became another hotel and was demolished in 1945. So for a while, it was the Oak Cliff College for Ladies. Look at this basketball here where it says OCC, Oak Cliff College. Dallas became a big city, and it is a pretty big city. It became a pretty big city because of the railroads. Two major railroads intersected in Dallas: the Houston and Texas Central Railroad, which will become Central Expressway, and the Texas and Pacific Railroad, which will become Pacific Avenue in downtown Dallas, which is where the DART train is right now. The Cedars was a neighborhood just south of Dallas, and it was where the Sanger brothers lived. It was just a little neighborhood south of downtown. This is a picture of SMU when it was still being built. The State Fair of Texas has been in its current location since 1890. It attracted 25 to 35,000 people a year. It had a swinging ride called the Razzle Dazzle, a Japanese village, and a fascinating skull collection belonging to Dr. Windsor, a phrenologist. Looks like it also, I can see horse racing too in the picture. Main Street, 1890. And the Big Red Courthouse was built in 1893. And the reason it looks kind of funny, and it does a kind of a funny building, is they spent a lot of money building it because the courthouses kept burning down. It's a hot city, and there would be fires. And there were like 4 courthouses on this location before they finally built this one, which apparently is fireproof. This is Principal W.H. Adamson of Oak Cliff High School for 40 years. When he retired or died, they named the school after him, Adamson High School. This is the first 7-Eleven, and it was across the street from Griner Middle School, where Griner is today, on the corner of Edgefield and 12th Street. And so 7-Eleven was started here in Dallas. It was open later than normal grocery stores. Normal grocery stores would close probably around 7 p.m., 8 p.m., but 7-Eleven stayed open much later. Now, this is an interesting photo that shows up on social media a lot. It's like, I can't even imagine kids playing on this. One thing I want to point out is that I don't see any girls. Girls were not allowed on the playground. They had to wear dresses, and playing was for boys. Girls stayed at home and played with their dolls. Sad but true. And this is a pawn shop on Main Street. And this is a family store on Grand Avenue. This is a sanitarium. This is St. Matthew's. This is a Dallas Public Library. Students say this is Dallas High School. It looks like it, but it's not. This is a different building. This is a medical school. Now this is a cool picture. This is downtown in 1903. Commerce Street, 1905. These are telegraph wires. This is a postcard from 1905. Now here's a flood from the Trinity River. Notice how the bridge is going out into the river, and the river destroyed the bridge. Here's another picture. And so the engineers looked at the Trinity and they said, we have got to do something about the Trinity River. It is ridiculous. And I read stories that if you lived in Oak Cliff during this time, you lived on your roof and you were up there for weeks. You could only get to Oak Cliff by boat while this river was flooded. It was crazy. And Elm Street, 1909. If you look here to the right, you see Neiman's. Neiman Marcus is a famous department store that is based in Dallas. Dallas Colored High School, 1909. Now the school is called Booker T. Washington. This is Pacific Avenue, 1910. And notice there is a car. Cars were very expensive in 1910. They won't get affordable until the 20s. So whoever has that car was very wealthy. But this is somebody taking a picture of the train because they're trying to redesign the trains in downtown. There were two separate train stations at the time, and they wanted to consolidate them into one. And the guy who was doing that, his name was Kessler. Kessler was a famous city planner in Dallas history. Kessler is also going to do something a little crazy in the 20s. He's going to move the Trinity River. Imagine that. He's going to move the freaking river. They're going to move it a mile to the west. What, really? I mean, crazy. They're going to get out their bulldozers and their dynamite, and they're going to move the river. And they did that. Okay. Dealey was a publisher of the Dallas Morning News. You may remember the term Dealey Plaza, where Kennedy was shot. This is the Houston Street Viaduct. It was one of the longest concrete bridges in the world. It was the longest concrete bridge in the world for a while. And I love this picture, Dallas Shakespeare Club, 1911. This is how women dressed before the flappers came along in the 20s. White Rock Lake was built by damming up White Rock Creek, and it was being built in 1910. This was supposed to be a water supply for Dallas, but Dallas grew so quickly that White Rock is not a water supply. Notice they're carrying cotton in these wagons. Dallas is really big for cotton. Lake Ray Hubbard used to be a cotton field. Lots of cotton around here. Here's a poster of something from 1914. Main Street, 1915. I'm starting to see some cars. The Adolphus Hotel, it's still there, and it looks beautiful in color. I don't know where this is, but I keep it because of Davis Street. Love Field Airport was used to train World War I pilots. Check out this picture. Look at the planes in the background. That's kind of cool. Fair Park was used as a training camp for soldiers for World War I. Now look at this. This is a parade in downtown Dallas it wasn't to celebrate World War I, it was a Liberty Bond drive. It was to finance the war. And this parade was held in spite of advisement because the Spanish flu was circulating, and there was a lot of advice from experts: do not have this parade, do not have this Liberty Bond drive, but people did it anyway. And then cases of the Spanish flu spiked after this gathering. So after World War I, we entered the 20s. The 20s were an interesting time in Dallas. The economy was good. Deep Ellum started to thrive artistically. Also, you had the KKK. The KKK was very powerful in the 20s. So let me show you what I have. This is Deep Ellum in the 20s. So if you wanted to see some blues, you would go to Deep Ellum. Remember, Prohibition was in the 20s. So here are some cops with some confiscated liquor. Now here's a picture of Adamson High School. The girls are doing calisthenics, and if you look really closely in the back, you can see some boys climb the pole so they can look at these sexy girls in their gym clothes. Strange, but that's how it was in the 20s. Dallas, 1923. Now this is Thanksgiving Square, and if you may remember this curve if you take the train today. That curve is still there. The streets still do that. Here's a picture from downtown in the 20s. Now, if you notice this picture, you see the Trinity River before it was moved. And look at the lines on the left. That's where the Trinity River will be moved in the 20s. Now, check this out. This is what the Trinity River looked like before they moved it. That's just wild. But they're going to move it. Okay. Remember what I said a minute ago about cotton. Ku Klux Klan Day at the State Fair of Texas. Hit pause and read that. It's crazy. They had a day dedicated for the Ku Klux Klan at the State Fair of Texas. Now, this is the oldest picture of Sunset High School I could find. These are some girls dressed up like Indians, Native Americans. And you notice in the background, you got this little hip flapper girl for a teacher. And this is 1926. This is Little Mexico, 1925. This is about where American Airlines Center is today. Pretty close to El Phoenix downtown. Here's just a little traffic jam I wanted to show because of the cars. Sunset High School's library. Here's a country club that was really popular in the 20s and the 30s, and it was demolished in the late 50s. Dallas Zoo, 1920s. Now check this out. Looks like a normal fire station, right? At 10th and Tyler Street in Bishop Arts. But check out what they turned it into. Glorious. Okay, just a picture of downtown. What's interesting about this picture is that it looks pretty much the same today. Davis at Edgefield. Here's a postcard of Theater Row in downtown Dallas on Elm Street. So in the 1930s, we had the Great Depression. And what we have here is, this is the first shopping center that surrounded a parking lot. So first of its kind in Highland Park Village. And here's Main Street, Dallas, 1934. And she is an actress from Sunset High School that got famous. I believe she was in King Kong 3. And here's a picture from 1934, downtown Dallas. And notice that the tallest building has the red Pegasus on top. For decades, that was a big deal, that Pegasus. That was the tallest thing in Dallas. It was a landmark. Here's a color postcard of the same thing from about the same time period. I read that pilots would look for the red Pegasus as guidance. Sunset's Band, 1937. Now, this really isn't the 1930s. This really goes back to the early 1900s, but Oak Cliff used to have an amusement park, and it did not survive the Great Depression. But it's crazy to know that Oak Cliff used to have a really big amusement park. It was kind of like Disney World. It had fireworks every night, it had marching bands, it had a roller skating rink that could hold 2,000 people. It had a log ride. Check this out. And just like Six Flags, had a log ride. And this is a picture of somebody that I imagine, I don't know if they had planes yet or not, but this is a picture of what Lake Cliff looked like at the time. This is obviously a postcard. It was a big deal. Okay. And it just did not survive the Great Depression. So here's a picture of the Trinity River flooding after they moved it, and that shows you that the levee system works. It keeps the water in the levees so downtown doesn't get flooded. And you can see the bridges are not destroyed. This is Dealey Plaza. It was built in the 30s during Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal program. Take young men off the unemployment line and put them to work beautifying the city. It was designed for flood control, but it was also designed for beauty, because when you're driving in from Fort Worth, this would be the first thing you saw. This is sunset from the 30s. This is the Harlem Theater. It was a theater only for African Americans, and it's going to stay that way until the 60s. Jim Crow laws, segregation. This is the Texas Theater. It was the first air-conditioned theater in Texas. So imagine that's your selling point. You go to get out of the heat and get in the air conditioning. This is also the theater where Lee Harvey Oswald will be arrested after he shot President Kennedy. This is a blues club in Deep Ellum. It might still be there, I'm not sure. These are some blues artists from Dallas. And these are the lyrics to a song about Deep Ellum. You can hit pause and take a look at that yourself. This is an interurban train that was in front of Sunset High School. And if you're standing in front of Sunset High School, you would see this house. You could still see it there today, just to give you a little bit of trigger your memory a little bit. So this is Jefferson Boulevard, or what it is now. Here's some Native Americans going to the State Fair of Texas in 1936. And the State Fair showed off new futuristic technologies. Here's one where the State Fair of Texas is showing off this crazy invention of television. Imagine a cop being able to get on a telephone and talking to other police departments from a city far away. And they could show pictures of criminals and drawings and things like that. So police departments can look after criminals. Remember, there was no television in the 30s or in the 40s. Television won't become popular until the 50s. So this was a big deal in 36. Bonnie and Clyde hung out in Oak Cliff a lot, and they were famous for 13 murders, kidnappings, burglaries, and robberies. And eventually the Texas Rangers shot him and killed him. Clyde is buried in the Western Heights Cemetery on Fort Worth Avenue. The Bonnie Barge was around in the 50s and the 60s, but this was a boat that would go on White Rock Lake. And imagine this, they had a jukebox on top and a jukebox on bottom, and they would just dance. I don't know if they drank or not, but it sounds like a fun way to spend the weekend. Now we get to the 40s. So World War II was a big deal. This is a picture at State Fair where young men are getting ready to recruit in the United States Army. And this is a really awesome picture from 1944, I believe. And on the next slide, somebody colorized it. That's cool. This is Sunset's Band in 1942. Imagine this. Dallas had a civilian defense where, they would protect us from German planes, Japanese infiltrators. They might have even said lights out at night. I'm not sure. It's hard to imagine German bombs in Dallas, but they had to prepare for the worst. This camp on top was built for the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, but during World War II, the camp was used to house German prisoners of war. It's at Winfrey Point at White Rock Lake. Below is a picture of Franklin Roosevelt commemorating this camp. This is after the war in 1947. Here's a picture of Elm Street getting dug up, maybe to build Central Expressway. Here's Jefferson Boulevard, 49. Here's a streetcar at 7th and Edgefield. Here's a picture of downtown Dallas in the early 50s. Here's a Cinco de Mayo celebration at Pike Park in 1952. And here's sunset around 1952. And there's Gym 1. There's Lake Cliff Park, or what's left of it in the 50s. Elm Street in the 50s, lots of movie theaters. If you hit pause, you can count a bunch of theaters. Here's a Freezette drive-in. I want to point out that segregation was a real thing. So if you were African American, you would get your stuff in the side window and you'd have to leave. You were not allowed to go inside. Here's some snow in the early 50s at Sunset. This is when Sunset had driver's ed. Now, if you look to the right, this is where North Park Mall is today. So Central at Northwest Highway looking south. So this is Central Expressway. And just a couple of miles north, this is Central at Royal Lane, just a few miles north. Preston Road, just north of Lover's Lane. This is in Highland Park. Here's the Midway at the State Fair. Here's some people protesting what's called Negro Achievement Day. There was one day out of the month that African Americans could attend the State Fair, and these people are protesting it in 1955, the same year of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. Here's a little traffic jam. Wynnewood Mall, 50s. Oak Cliff El Phoenix, 57. I think they just tore that down. Central at Arapaho. I think I see a tornado in the back. Pretty soon in the 50s, the streetcars will be removed and to make more room for cars. That was a bad idea, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Here's the Dallas Zoo. Kings Highway in Edgefield, a color picture of a streetcar. Cosmetology and algebra at Dallas Colored High School, later Booker T. Washington. This is Jefferson Boulevard. There's a drought at White Rock. Postcard. The legend of the Lady of the Lake. The legend goes is that if you're driving around White Rock Lake and there's a girl hitchhiking in a white dress, you pick her up, she gets in your passenger seat, and you look over and there's just a wet spot in your passenger seat. Supposedly she's a ghost because her and her boyfriend were fooling around and went into their car went into the lake and she drowned. And now she's a ghost that haunts the lake at night. South Oak Cliff. Jefferson. Now in 57, this tornado was the most televised and most photographed tornado in all of history up to that point. It was an F3. It was a pretty big one. A few people died. This guy is from Dallas. He worked for TI and he invented the integrated circuit. Without him, we wouldn't have any of this stuff that's pictured here. Big Town Mall. The 60s, you got the end of legal segregation in schools. Kennedy was shot. White flight, growth of the suburbs like Duncanville and Plano and Irving. Here's a Highway 183 under construction. Here's just Central in 62. This picture was taken on the first day of integration. I say the white moms aren't too happy, but I don't know. That could be just them just picking up their kids. You don't know that. Kennedy was shot. That I have a whole separate PowerPoint for this, so I don't want to get into that. Here's the Kennedy Memorial. Dallas, 1968. Here's a postcard of the zoo. This is the construction of Texas Stadium, which is now demolished. It was in Irving. Here are some anti-Vietnam protesters in Dallas in 1972. Notice they're not hippies. Just because you protested against the war doesn't mean you're a hippie. That's a different thing. DFW was the biggest airport in the world for years when it was built. It is now the third busiest airport in the world. Here's Reunion Tower being built in 77. Here's Dallas in 78. This is the first Chili's restaurant. I used to go here a lot. It's on Greenville and Meadow, just a few miles north of Northwest Highway, a few miles south of LBJ, and it was a great restaurant. Dallas is in Tornado Alley. We have to look out for tornadoes in Dallas. So they come around about every year. This is the tollway. This is about where the Galleria Mall is. Hasn't been built yet. There was a TV show called Dallas in the early 80s, and in my parents' generation, it was a huge TV show. And it's when asked, what do you think of when you think of the city of Dallas? Number one is the Dallas Cowboys. Number two is this TV show. If you ask people who are a little older than me. Other shows that were filmed in Dallas include Cedars. Barney was filmed in Plano. Walker, Texas Ranger. Other movies that were filmed in Dallas include RoboCop, Born on the 4th of July, also Oliver Stone's JFK, obviously, because Kennedy was shot here. Another movie that was filmed here is Office Space by a guy named Mike Judge. He also, when you think of Beavis and Butthead, they went to Highland High because Mike Judge used to be a substitute teacher at Lake Highlands High School. And King of the Hill is in Arlen, Texas. Well, think Garland, Texas. Musicians include Edie Brickell, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Erykah Badu. Mariano Martinez invented the frozen margarita machine. He was inspired by the Slurpee machine, which was probably also invented in Dallas because 7-Eleven is from Dallas. This is Town East Mall from when I was a kid. It doesn't look like that anymore. So Dallas is a really big city, but it's not a very crowded city like other cities in the world. And Dallas does have a reputation for tearing down its history to replace it with shiny new buildings. And that is it. Thank you very much.